Yo guys, what is going on? JPS back for another video, and today we're going to be watching Australia and New Zealand compared. Now, a few days ago we watched Geography Now New Zealand, which gave us a little glimpse into what New Zealand is like as a country. However, I'm hoping this video will give us a more in-depth view on the differences between Australia and New Zealand, allowing us to get an even deeper glimpse into both of these countries. Really have enjoyed taking a pretty deep look into Australia so far. We've reacted to a lot of different videos, and I'm thinking we're going to start checking out more countries in the region, Oceania, that was weird. But yeah, make sure you guys hit the like button, hit subscribe. Let's get right into this.
Australia and New Zealand, two countries in Oceania, more specifically Australasia. Separated by the Tasman Sea, they're two well-developed countries that often rank really high on nearly every quality of life ranking list. And yeah, they're just pretty awesome. Both seem to be kind of far away from the entire rest of the world. And because of that, also since they're so both unique, kind of in their own little world. Let's first look at some differences between the two. First of all, New Zealand doesn't exist. Okay, that's just basically a meme at this point that started since so many world maps were leaving out New Zealand. In fact, there's even a large subreddit dedicated to them. But don't believe the hype. New Zealand, in fact, does exist.
That's so disrespectful.
See? There it is. Australia exists too, but it's about 29 times bigger than New Zealand. It's the 6th largest country in the world, baby. That said, it only has around 5 times as many people. Why? Well, check this map out. Only 2% of the population of Australia lives in the yellow area. And why does only 2% of the population of Australia live in that yellow area? That's because much of it is desert or near desert. 35% of the Australian continent doesn't get enough rain. But what about up here? Well, few live here mostly because it's so isolated from the rest of the population of Australia. Only one metropolitan area in New Zealand has a population over 1 million people. That'd be the magnificent Auckland. Australia, meanwhile, has 5 metro areas with over 1 million people. Its 2 biggest cities, Sydney and Melbourne, each have more people than the entire country of New Zealand. Being so much bigger, Australia has a wider range of different types of climates. New Zealand has mostly an oceanic climate, whereas Australia, yeah, just look at this map here. As I said earlier, much of it is desert or semi-arid. I should probably now bring up the sparsely populated area famously known as the Outback. While the Outback is typically only associated with the dry parts of Australia, it also includes the northern areas of the country that have a savanna climate. Basically, the huge area in Australia where humans don't dare live. It's a magical place. And believe it or not, Australia has a little bit of rainforest and parts of a monsoon climate up here along the eastern coast, southeastern coast, and island state of Tasmania, where most of the population lives, by the way. Australia has a mostly oceanic and humid subtropical climate, but don't forget the lovely Mediterranean climate along parts of the southern and southwestern coasts. That's also where a lot of Australians live. Australia also has a more varied landscape, and this magnificent sandstone formation, Uluru, one of the most important indigenous sites in the country. New Zealand's mountains are way more impressive and tower over Australia's mountains. In fact, many people not from Australia forget that Australia actually has mountains. Meanwhile, everyone seems to know about New Zealand's dramatic mountains, mainly due to
the movie, and that's what I know New Zealand for.
To the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films. The producer of those films, Peter Jackson, is from New Zealand, and he almost single-handedly put New Zealand on the map due to those films. Remember how I said it's often not on maps? Sorry for the bad joke there. Anyway, you can visit the actual Shire from the film today. And fun fact, my uncles lived in New Zealand while they worked on the Lord of the Rings films. What was I talking about again? Oh yes, mountains! New Zealand's highest peak is...
This guy has an interesting, like... Is anyone else noticing it? It's like the way he's pronouncing things. I'm not knocking him, but it's interesting.
Around 1,500 meters taller than Australia's highest peak. Well, mainland Australia, at least. No one seems to care about you, Mawson Peak. Way over on Australia's Heard Island. New Zealand sits on the infamous Ring of Fire, an area where lots of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions tend to occur. Australia doesn't have to worry about volcanoes. Also, since Australia sits on top of a very stable tectonic plate with no active faults, residents there don't have to worry much about large earthquakes. New Zealanders, on the other hand, have to worry about a major earthquake at least once every 10 years. Related to this, both Australia and New Zealand occasionally have to worry about tsunamis. Australia gets hit more by cyclones, while both countries have to worry about floods and wildfires. Australia is more often in the news for them. Also, while bushfires are a regular thing in Australia, it had one of the worst bushfire seasons in recorded history from September 2019 to March 2020. It was catastrophic and a bit horrifying, to say the least. New Zealand is made up of islands. Australia is mostly made up of a continent.
Well, actually, some people actually call Australia a really big island.
Well, that's preposterous. What a silly notion. Australia is clearly a continent.
I mean, I agree with you, but that doesn't stop the millions of people out there from calling it an island.
Well, someone needs to stop them. Liam, you must stop them.
Well, I don't know if that's possible, Mr. Beat. However, I can make a video looking at why some people think Australia is an island.
Right on. Can you have it done by the time I'm done with this video?
I'll see what I can do.
Dang, that's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. So anyway, like I said, Australia is also mainly a continent, the oldest, flattest, and driest continually inhabited continent with the worst soil for farming. And yes, New Zealand is made up of islands, around 600 of them, and they're mostly remnants of a bigger landmass under the sea. Called
That's a good throwback.
Zealandia. Of those 600, however, only 13 are inhabited by humans. Most of the population of New Zealand lives on the Big Two, the two larger main islands, the North Island, or Te Maui, and South Island, or Te Waipounamu. Oh yeah? Well, Australia actually has 8,222 islands, so it's so much more than just a measly continent. Many seem to forget that New Zealand is lower in latitude. I mean, higher in latitude. Gosh, that's confusing. It's higher in latitude than most of Australia. Further south, okay? Latitude-wise, Australia is more African than European, by the way. Australia borders the Indian Ocean. New Zealand borders the Pacific Ocean. East of New Zealand is just, wow. Quite a bit of ocean there. And quite a bit of ocean west of Australia, too. Australians are often called Aussies, and New Zealanders are often called Kiwi.
Let's settle something, because a lot of you guys in the comments have been talking about it's Aussies. Ozzies. So, what's going on here? Is that what the local Australians say, or I don't know. I'm kind of confused on that. But yeah, I've definitely heard Kiwis. That him showing that sea just made me realize like how isolated these two countries are, or continent. Well, still a country, but yeah.
That name comes from the kiwi, a flightless bird native to the country that's also a national symbol. Here is a kiwi holding a kiwi.
So cute.
New Zealand is growing at a faster rate. Maybe why is because the cost of living is lower in New Zealand. Not only that, but residents there generally pay lower taxes than residents in Australia. Australia has a higher GDP per capita. That said, wealth inequality is a bit worse there. Also, New Zealand spends a higher percentage of its total GDP on education. Major industries in Australia include mining, energy, manufacturing, and financial services. Major industries in New Zealand include agriculture, forestry, tourism, and food processing. New Zealand generally has faster internet speeds. While sheep outnumber humans in Australia 3-1, sheep outnumber humans in New Zealand 6-1. Residents of Australia Australia are generally more religious. The biggest religion there is Christianity. Within that group, most are Protestant. Almost half of New Zealanders have no religion. There's no big...
What? Coming from the United States, that's insane. Yeah, we definitely need to react to a video about like the breakdown of different religious groups and political parties in both Australia and New Zealand. 50% non-religious. Are you kidding me? Our entire government runs on religion. The framework of our Constitution is based on religion. That's just so wild to hear.
Highway that goes straight through Australia east to west. I mean, there's the Outback Highway, a series of roads and dirt tracks that link the east and west, but I ain't trusting that, dude. There is a north-south highway that links Adelaide and Darwin, though. Stewart Highway, aka the track. It's just a 31-hour drive. There's a weird tradition in New Zealand of going places without shoes, apparently. You know, I think they're onto something there. New Zealand legalized same-sex marriage more than 4 years before Australia. Australia has possibly the world's longest fence, meant to prevent the dingoes from killing sheep in the southeastern part of the country. In fact, it's even called the dingo fence. Due to its long geographic isolation, most of Australia's mammals, amphibians, and reptiles are uniquely native to it.
Why is there no kangaroo, though?
New Zealand has hardly any dangerous animals, or animals period, really. Australia, on the other hand, has the most animals with the most deadly venom. Sure, it's known for its cuddly koalas, wombats, and kangaroos, but many of its native animals will actively try to kill you, from sharks.
Hey, I don't know about cuddly koalas. That video, that animal compilation we watched, there were multiple koalas attacking people. Some of them were cute, but...
to jellyfish, to snakes.
These animals are deadly.
That said, this may all be overhyped. In fact, due to anti-venom inventions, these two horrifying spiders native to Australia haven't killed anyone there since 1979. Australia has one of the highest electoral turnout rates in the world. Why? Well, probably because it's mandatory for citizens there to vote. Not in New Zealand, though. While medical marijuana...
Hey, it's not mandatory for them to vote. It's mandatory for them to go and put their name on it. You guys taught me that. You don't have to tick nothing, and you get sausages. Oh, what's this about?
Marijuana is legal in both countries. Parts of Australia have either decriminalized or straight up legalized.
Similar to us.
Speaking of parts, New Zealand is divided into 16 regions. Australia has 6 states, 3 internal territories, and 7 external territories. So what's the difference between states and territories there? Well, states have more freedom to do their own thing. Territories are more under the direct control of the federal government. Hey, speaking of government, while both have a parliamentary system, representative democracies, and constitutional monarchies, Australia is a federation. And speaking of that, New Zealand once had the opportunity to become part of that federation. Yep, it could have been part of Australia, but turned it down. Oh hey, let's look at some history now, shall we? Humans have lived in Australia up to 64,000 years before they lived in New Zealand. 64,000 years. Aboriginal Australians, or a name given to the various groups of people who all first settled Australia, likely arrived by sea from Asia and developed a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Over a period of time of tens of thousands of years, the climate of Australia drastically changed. The earliest humans reached modern-day Tasmania around 30,000 years ago. Back then it was connected to the continent via a land bridge. The first Torres Strait Islanders arrived from what is now Papua New Guinea around 2,500 years ago. New Zealand, meanwhile, was one of the last places settled by humans on Earth. It wasn't until 1,000 years ago, or maybe as recent as 750 years ago, that the Maori first arrived on canoes. The Dutch were the first Europeans to come across both places. In 1606, the Dutch explorer Willem Willem Janszoon first landed in Australia. 36 years later, the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman spotted New Zealand, but never settled there. The same year that Janszoon had landed in Australia, the Spanish explorer Luis Vaz de Torres checked out the Torres Strait and its associated islands, which is why they're all named after him. However, it was the Dutch who came back in greater numbers to check out Australia, which they called New Holland, of course. Not many stuck around to live, though. Around 720-ish, some Makassar people from modern-day Indonesia came down to settle Australia. And then there was that James Cook dude, an extremely influential British explorer and cartographer. He first checked out, mapped out, and claimed New Zealand for Britain in 1769, and then checked out, mapped out, and claimed the eastern coast of Australia for Britain the next year. The French came to both places soon after that.
Seems like there was a lot going on in the 1770s, huh?
Looking at possible colonization, but they became a bit preoccupied and never followed through. The British, however, did. In 1788, they arrived to settle, establishing the colony of New South Wales, specifically at Sydney Cove on January 26th, which today is Australia's National Day, Australia Day. Many of the first settlers of Sydney were British convicts, criminals, mostly for petty crimes, but you know. Over the next 100 years, the British would establish several other colonies across the entire continent. Similar to when the British established colonies in North America, at first they tried to live somewhat harmoniously with the various indigenous people of Australia, who, you know, had already been there for tens of thousands of years. However, similar to North America, the indigenous population had little resistance to several introduced diseases the British brought over. Smallpox, measles, influenza, typhoid, and tuberculosis possibly shrunk the Aboriginal population up to 70%.
Wow.
And then, of course, future British settlers weren't as kind to the natives, and they took land that many indigenous folks claimed was supposed to be communal. This led to much conflict, especially in the early 1800s. Meanwhile, things were a bit more...
It's literally like you mirror what happened in the United States. Crazy.
More chill in New Zealand. The first British settlers there were mostly Christian missionaries, and they lived at Rangahua Bay beginning in 1815. More folks from Britain founded Kirikiri in 1822 and Bluff in 1823. The Maori and British mostly got along, at least until the New Zealand Wars broke out. What a surprise! Treaties had been broken, and the Maori got upset. Even though the Maori were greatly outnumbered and had inferior weapon technology, they put up a good fight for decades, but ultimately lost most of their land and livelihood. Most of the new settlers in both places did the whole farming thing, but land in Australia wasn't as fertile as many were hoping it would be. However, mining also became a thing. Gold rushes caused the Australian population to more than double between 1851 and 1860. New Zealand also has some gold rushes in the 1860s. Meanwhile, Australia and New Zealand, being literally on the other side of the world from Britain, had been becoming more and more independent. The British Parliament did allow a form of self-government to the Australian colonies and the colony of New Zealand. By the 1880s, though, a huge nationalist movement had developed in Australia. Surprisingly, a huge feminist movement had developed in New Zealand also by that time. In 1893, New Zealand became the first country in the world to give women the right to vote.
Wow.
But hey, 9 years later, Australia became the second country in the world to finally let women vote. Oh, and...
So I find that interesting how progressive they were, yet I think Australia actually legalized gay marriage after the United States did. And New Zealand wasn't like that far ahead. I mean, they were there, but we were all within the 2010s. So I find that it's a little interesting. I don't know. That's weird. Because that's very, I mean, that was before the 20th century. Like, that's crazy. Wow. surprised.
Here, Australia became the second country in the world to finally let women vote. Oh, and that was the year after Australia became an independent country. Like I said earlier, Australia said New Zealand could join up, but New Zealand was like, nah man, we're cool. Australia was like, suit yourself, and carried on. Instead, New Zealand earned Dominion status in 1907, which was similar to Australia, so it has pretty much been an independent country ever since as well. Only in the 1900s did the population of both countries really start to grow. And grow they did, although both today are still sparsely populated. Alright then, for the rest of the video, let's look at the similarities between the two countries. Due to the aforementioned legacy of the British, the majority of residents of both countries speak English. Maori and New Zealand Sign Language are also official languages in New Zealand. Residents of both countries have different accents, although for outsiders that may be hard to pick up. One way to tell is how they say their vowels. Aussies tend to draw out vowels compared to Kiwis. According to the World Happiness Index, residents of both are generally among the happiest in the world. Probably related to this, both have very low poverty. Both have a higher percentage of residents born in another country. And if you are interested in moving to either, because you know you want to be happy too, know that both are two of the easiest countries to immigrate to in the world. Because of this high immigration, both are ethnically diverse. While the majority of residents trace their background to Europe, more than 16% of Australians and 12% of New Zealanders trace their ancestry to Asia. New Zealand also still has a large Maori population. Maori culture remains a big part of New Zealand culture today. Both
As it
have
should.
a similar median household income. The minimum age to drink alcohol in both is 18. Both have areas with weird time zones. Both have flags that are often confused since they're so similar, since they both feature the British Union Jack in the top left corner and stars. An easy way to know the difference is that New Zealand stars are red with anger from constantly getting mixed up with Australia's. The ozone layer is thinner above both countries compared to most of the rest of the world. As I said earlier, both are two of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. Australia in particular. Sure, it may account for just over 5% of the world's land area, but it has just 0.3% of the global population. A big reason why is urbanization. Hey, speaking of which, both are two of the most urbanized countries in the world. Odds are, if you live in either country, you live in a city. Both have versions of universal health care. Related to this, both have a really high life expectancy. The median age in both is about the same regarding violent crime. Both are two of the safest countries in the world. Both have historically had to deal with lots of invasive species or non-native types of organisms introduced to an area that become way overpopulated and hurt the local environment. As I said earlier, many people who live in both have recent ancestors from other parts of the world, and those ancestors brought lots of animals with them that had no natural predators. In other words, no one eats them. Because of this, in Australia, they've had to deal with an overpopulation of European rabbits, deer, cane toads, and honeybees, as well as wild herds of cats, goats, and horses. And believe it or not, Australia is the only country in the world with wild herds of camels. Oh, and there was that
I feel like at this point, nothing surprises me with Australia's animals.
mice plague last year, goodness gracious. New Zealand also has its fair share of invasive species, many of the same ones as Australia, but other standouts like rats, possums, and weasels, but it has been a bit more aggressive getting rid of them in recent years. Residents of both often call the undeveloped areas of their countries, quote, the bush. Rugby is ridiculously popular in both, and of course there's all the sports rivalries between the two, the biggest probably revolving around rugby and rugby league, of course, but also cricket and netball, all these weird sports down under. Oh, down under is what folks call these two countries, since they're, quote, down under most other countries, meaning they're pretty far south, man. Coincidentally, the song Down Under by Men at Work is also the national anthem of Australia. Just kidding. But shout out to Australian music. No offense, New Zealand, but in my humble opinion, Australia's music is defo way better. Don't believe me? Name one New Zealand band off the top of your head. Exactly. Nope, Lord's not a band. Also, there's this Australian band called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard that wrote a song about me, so that's pretty rad and stuff. And one final thing. In 2006, an Australian tried to sell New Zealand on eBay. He was unsuccessful. In conclusion, while there is indeed a bit of a rivalry overall today between Australia and New Zealand, I think they will always have this special bond due to being on the edge of the globe, far away from most of it all. They really are two special, amazing countries. Oh, before I go, I almost forgot. Liam?
Yes, Mr. Beat?
Did you happen to get done with your video?
Why, yes, I did, and I'm happy to report that Australia is an island continent.
Well, it's settled then.
What's the rest of this?
Hey, did you know that in just a few clicks, now my Ritas, I think I said that properly, he is from Australia and he did...
What is this? Oh, he's like, this is a promotion? That's what he looks like. Yeah, that guy had an interesting voice and way of speaking. I still don't know how to feel about it, but it was an excellent video. Learned a lot. I like how much historical stuff there was as well, because I didn't know too much. I mean, there was some in some of the previous videos we watched, but not a crazy amount. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought about it. Hit the like button, guys. Hit subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.